Welcome to the Pencil Bob channel. I hope you enjoy my stories.
I pulled up to my friend Jake's house nestled in the heart of Maple Grove Estates, an HOA community that I'd heard stories about but never visited. As I navigated the narrow streets, I couldn't help but notice the sea of vehicles lining both sides. It was like threading a needle, inching my way through without scratching any of the parked cars. "Geez, what's going on here?" I muttered to myself, gripping the steering wheel tightly. Is there some kind of block party I didn't know about? Finally, after what felt like an eternity of careful maneuvering, I spotted Jake's house. He was standing in the driveway waving me over with a grin on his face. "Hey man," Jake called out as I stepped out of my car. "Glad you made it. How was the drive-in?" I chuckled, shaking my head. "It was interesting. What's with all the cars? You guys having some kind of neighborhood-wide shindig?" Jake's grin widened. "Nah, this is just a regular Thursday night in Maple Grove Estates. Come on in, I'll explain everything." As we walked into his house, I couldn't shake the bizarre image of the crowded streets. Jake led me to his living room where a small gathering of his friends was already in full swing. "All right, spill it," I said, accepting a beer from him. "What's the deal with parking around here? I've never seen anything like it." Jake leaned back in his armchair, taking a swig of his own drink. "Oh, that's just our monthly parking fee in action." I raised an eyebrow. "Monthly parking fee? What are you talking about?" "See, our lovely HOA has this brilliant rule," Jake began, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "No street parking allowed. But instead of enforcing it like normal people, they've turned it into a money-making scheme." "How so?" I asked, intrigued. "About once a month now, the HOA board does their little patrol, slapping $25 fines on every car parked on the street. They're ridiculously thorough, too. No car is ever overlooked. It wasn't always just once a month, though. At first, they tried handing out fines daily, but that blew up fast. People were furious, and the whole neighborhood was ready to riot. Things got so bad that Karen, the head of the board, ended up hiding in her house for days, refusing to face the chaos she'd caused. Now, they've toned it down to once a month, but the bitterness still lingers." I nearly choked on my beer. "Are you serious? And people just accept this?" Jake shrugged. "What choice do we have? Most houses here have tiny driveways, barely enough for 2 cars. And don't even get me started on the garages. They're more like oversized closets. So everyone just treats it like I asked, still trying to wrap my head around the concept. "Exactly," Jake nodded. "It's cheaper than building bigger driveways or expanding garages. Plus it's way more convenient. No more musical cars every morning." As the night wore on, I heard more stories about the infamous Maple Grove Estates HOA. It seemed like every resident had a tale to tell, each more outrageous than the last. "Remember the Great Gnome Purge of 2022? One of Jake's neighbors, Julie, chimed in. "The HOA decided that garden gnomes were tacky and banned them overnight. You should have seen Mrs. Johnson next door. She had a collection of over 50 gnomes. It was like a miniature massacre in her front yard." Another guest, Tom, piped up. "Oh, that's nothing. What about the time they tried to standardize our mailboxes? They wanted everyone to have these hideous bronze monstrosities, cost a fortune too." "How did that turn out?" I asked, fascinated by the absurdity of it all. Tom grinned. "Let's just say there was a midnight mailbox swap meet. One day, all the old mailboxes mysteriously reappeared and the bronze ones vanished without a trace." As the stories continued, I couldn't help but notice a mix of frustration and amusement in everyone's voices. It was clear that living in Maple Grove Estates was a constant battle against arbitrary rules and power-hungry board members. "But wait," I said, a thought suddenly occurring to me. "What about emergency vehicles? Surely they can't fine ambulances or fire trucks?" Jake let out a bitter laugh. "Oh, you'd think so, wouldn't you? But our HOA president, Karen, yes, her name is actually Karen, she tried to fine a police car last month." My jaw dropped. "You're kidding." "Nope," Jake said, popping the P. "Officer Rodriguez was responding to a domestic disturbance call. Had to park on the street because, well, where else was he gonna park? Karen marched up to him as he was leaving and tried to hand him a ticket." "What happened?" I asked, leaning forward in my seat. Jake's eyes twinkled with mischief. "Let's just say Officer Rodriguez wasn't too pleased. He may have mentioned something about obstruction of justice and abuse of power. Karen's been unusually quiet since then." As the night wore on, I found myself both entertained and horrified by the stories of life in Maple Grove Estates. The parking situation was just the tip of the iceberg. There were tales of forbidden paint colors, regulated grass heights, and even a failed attempt to ban children from playing outside on Sundays. "But why do you all stay?" I couldn't help but ask. "Surely it's not worth all this hassle?" The room fell silent for a moment. Jake was the first to speak up. "It's complicated," he sighed. "For some of us it's about the investment. Property values here are still pretty good, despite or maybe because of the strict rules. Others have just been here so long it's home, you know. Julie nodded in agreement. Plus there's a weird sense of community that comes from shared suffering. We're all in this ridiculous boat together. As the party began to wind down, I found myself stepping outside for some fresh air. The street was still lined with cars, a silent testament to the ongoing battle between residents and their HOA. Just then, I spotted a figure moving between the vehicles, illuminated by the streetlights. It was an older woman, her gray hair pulled back in a tight bun, clutching a clipboard to her chest. "Is that?" I started to ask Jake, who had followed me outside. "Yep, that's Karen," he confirmed. "Looks like she's doing a late-night recon. Probably trying to catch anyone who might have forgotten about tonight's impromptu HOA meeting." I watched in disbelief as Karen meticulously noted down license plate numbers, occasionally tutting to herself. "Should we say something?" I whispered to Jake. He shook his head. "Nah, best to just let her do her thing. Engaging only encourages her." As we stood there watching Karen's slow progress down the street, a police cruiser suddenly turned the corner. It was driving slowly, clearly looking for an address. "Oh, this should be good," Jake murmured. The police car came to a stop right in front of us. A young officer stepped out, looking around with a confused expression. "Excuse me," he called out to Jake and me. "I'm looking for 1542 Maple Drive. We got a noise complaint." Before either of us could respond, Karen materialized next to the officer's car. "Officer," she said, her voice sickly sweet, "I'm Karen Johnson, president of the Maple Grove Estates Homeowners Association. I'm afraid I'll have to ask you to move your vehicle. Street parking is strictly prohibited here." The officer blinked, clearly taken aback. "Ma'am, I'm responding to a call." "I'll only be a few minutes." Karen's smile didn't waver, but her eyes hardened. "I understand, officer. However, rules are rules. I'll have to issue you a citation if you don't move your car immediately." I could see the officer's patience wearing thin. "Ma'am, this is an official police vehicle responding to a call. I'm not subject to your HOA rules." Karen's smile finally faltered. "Now see here, young man. I don't care if you're the President of the United States. In Maple Grove Estates, everyone follows the rules, no exceptions." The situation was rapidly escalating. Jake and I exchanged worried glances, unsure whether to intervene or continue watching this train wreck unfold. Just then another car turned onto the street. It was a tow truck, its yellow lights flashing in the darkness. Karen's face lit up like a Christmas tree. "A perfect timing, officer. If you won't move your vehicle voluntarily, I'm afraid we'll have to have it towed." The officer's hand instinctively moved to his radio. "Ma'am, if you interfere with a police investigation, I'll have no choice but to arrest you for obstruction of justice." The tow truck driver, sensing the tension, wisely decided to keep driving, leaving Karen sputtering in indignation. "This is outrageous," she exclaimed. "I'll be filing a formal complaint with your superiors." The officer, to his credit, remained calm. "Feel free to do so, ma'am. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a noise complaint to investigate." As the officer walked away, leaving a fuming Karen in his wake, Jake turned to me with a weary smile. "And that, my friend, is just another night in Maple Grove Estates. Still glad you came to visit?" I shook my head in disbelief. "I don't know whether to laugh or cry." "How do you deal with this on a daily basis?" Jake shrugged. "You learn to find the humor in it, I guess. It's either that or go insane." As we headed back inside, I couldn't help but feel a mix of amusement and pity for the residents of Maple Grove Estates. Their lives seemed to be a constant battle against arbitrary rules and overzealous enforcement. The party continued late into the night, with more stories of HOA shenanigans being shared. There was the time the board tried to ban Halloween decorations, claiming they were too scary for children. Or the infamous incident when they attempted to regulate the types of plants people could grow in their own backyards. As the night wore on, I found myself both fascinated and horrified by life in Maple Grove Estates. The parking situation, which had initially caught my attention, seemed almost tame compared to some of the other rules and regulations the residents had to navigate. When it was finally time for me to leave, I stepped out into the night, keys in hand, only to find a bright orange ticket tucked under my windshield wiper. "You've got to be kidding me," I muttered, plucking the citation from my car. Jake, who had followed me out, burst into laughter. "Welcome to Maple Grove Estates. Looks like you've been officially initiated." I stared at the $25 fine in disbelief. "But I'm just a visitor. Surely they can't." Jake clapped me on the shoulder. "Oh, they can and they will. Consider it a souvenir of your time here." As I drove home that night, carefully navigating the still crowded streets, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd just experienced something truly bizarre. the residents of Maple Grove Estates seemed trapped in a never-ending cycle of arbitrary rules and petty power struggles. Part of me wanted to dismiss it all as a strange anomaly, a cautionary tale of what happens when you give too much power to a homeowners association. But another part of me wondered how many other communities out there were dealing with similar issues, silently suffering under the tyranny of overzealous HOAs. One thing was certain: I'd never look at a no parking sign the same way again. And as for moving into an HOA community, well, let's just say Maple Grove Estates had effectively cured me of any such notions. As I finally pulled into my own driveway, free from any parking restrictions or clipboard-wielding Karens, I couldn't help but feel a wave of relief. My home might not have perfectly manicured lawns or color-coordinated mailboxes, but at least I could park my car without fear of financial repercussions. The experience at Maple Grove Estates would stay with me for a long time, a reminder of the strange and often frustrating world of homeowners associations. And while I might chuckle at the absurdity of it all, I couldn't help but feel for Jake and his neighbors, trapped in a system that seemed designed to make their lives more difficult. As I drifted off to sleep that night, visions of tow trucks and garden gnomes danced in my head, a surreal reminder of the night I'd spent in the land of the $25 parking fee.
I would like to thank you for watching the video to the end. To encourage us to make more videos, please like, subscribe, comment, as well as share. Check out this other video if you haven't already.